But if that 8-year-old little boy were to come to you right now and have a conversation with you, what do you think will emerge through that conversation?
I would say to my 8-year-old self, no, I didn't quite make basketball, but I also found something even more that I'm closely passionate about, and that is travel. And I firmly believe that travel is the greatest teacher that there is available. I hit 80 countries now that I've been fortunate enough to.
You spoke about understanding yourself and finding yourself. How does travel in your mind, Chris, and then travel is a big part of your journey. How does traveling really help us explore who we are? Welcome to another episode of the Ignited Neurons Podcast. And this one, when I met this person, he was in Canada. And so we were across the globe. But now I have the joy and the pleasure of welcoming Chris back to Australia. How does it feel, Chris, to be back in Australia, but also on the podcast? How does that feel?
Feels great. As we were talking just before we came on, this is truly one of the most beautiful places on earth. So I'm grateful to be back. I'm grateful to be re-experiencing things that I grew up with. It's beautiful.
Amazing, amazing. And I always do this to our listeners, Chris. I give them like a hypothesis that based on what I know of you, and I don't know enough yet, but based on what I know of you, I'm pretty sure we'll talk about scaling businesses. We will talk about leadership. We will also maybe speak about how do you really thrive as a human being in this day and age. And I don't know where this conversation goes, but that's the hypothesis that we'll play with.
Sounds great to me.
Sounds like a plan. The first question, Chris, that we kind of kick off the conversation, and it just takes us to the deep end of things. If that 8-year-old Chris, who I'm assuming was growing somewhere in Australia, and you'll correct me if that's wrong, but if that 8-year-old little boy were to come to you right now and have a conversation with you, what do you think will emerge through that conversation?
Whew, it's a beautiful question. And I think when I think about that age when I was 8 years old, firstly, I was obsessed with basketball. So the first question I'd probably ask myself was, did you make it into the NBA? I had incredible hoop dreams growing up when I was younger. My whole life was centered around basketball. So I think my 8-year-old self would be asking those questions. Where did basketball take you? Where have you been? Because I remember vividly growing up, watching basketball, being enamored with Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, and that's really where I thought life would take me as an 8-year-old. So that's probably where the conversation would be centered around basketball.
Got it. And what would your response be to him? Because I'm assuming that you're not a basketball player, but yeah, then let's go deep on that.
So I didn't quite make it, so this would be a different conversation. Once I got to the age around 2021, when I realized I wasn't going to make that, I made a pivotal decision at that point to really travel and see the world. I would say to my 8-year-old self, no, I didn't quite make basketball, but I also found something even more that I'm closely passionate about, and that is travel. And travel has taken me to incredible places and really has helped shape me into the person that I am today. And I firmly believe that travel is the greatest teacher that there is available to us in life.
Fascinating, fascinating. I'd love to know a little bit more on that because at 20, 21 years old, how did travel come into the picture? And then what were those early experiences that you still kind of very passionately and vividly so are recalling?
Yeah, so at that age, as you are still figuring out life, and it's a rite of passage for most Australians to live in the UK, which you're probably becoming familiar with. Our culture is very similar to the UK. And one of my good friends at that point, his older sister had lived in the UK. I think she came back and was raving about it to us. So I think we just made a decision that we've got to go and live in the UK and explore, have fun. And at that point, I hadn't really traveled too much. I think I left the country once to do an after-schoolies trip, as we call them here in Australia, or spring break trip in North America. So I hadn't really traveled too much. And then that trip to the UK changed my life. I ended up staying for 2 years in the UK and then came back to Sydney at that point in 2007. Stayed for just over a year and booked a one-way to Vancouver. And that's where I've been living for the past 16 years in Canada, which has brought me back to Australia today.
Oh, like help me understand. And I come from India, right? For me as an Indian, I'm still integrating myself into the Australian culture and the understanding. If my eldest son comes and tells me at 14 years old that I want to work at a Coles or at a cafe, I'm like, what the hell is wrong with you? Because that's the thing that I've kind of been raised with. So help me understand, what is the fascination about that I'm seeing a lot in the Australian kind of mind space as you're referring to? That's the first question, and then I'll go to the next one.
Well, I think as you're understanding yourself, Australia is so far away from the rest of the world, which is a good and a bad thing in a lot of different ways. We can be certainly isolated. And also, from a travel perspective, when we travel, typically Australians take longer trips because we're so far away from the rest of the world. And typically, when I travel a lot over my travels throughout the years, you always typically run into Australians, Kiwis, the Brits, European different people as well, because generally highly traveled cultures in a lot of ways. So I think that's part of it. And as I mentioned earlier on, a big part of Australians' culture is from British culture. So naturally we have this gravitation to move to the UK in a lot of ways. And I think there's a statistic around Australians in London specifically. I think it's around 500,000 every year on working holidays visas or even staying permanently from that point as well. That number may be a little bit outdated, but I remember reading that recently. So that just kind of shows you where Australians are traveling to. And I think London's such a great city. Your launching pad to take you anywhere in Europe.
Fascinating. I love how you're giving me that this almost like new perspective that it's also how the geography places us in Australia, and it also could be that London is that there's this deep connection that Australia shares with the UK, and that kind of wants you to go to London, but then also how it opens the world up for a young Australian growing up and maybe 18, 20 years old. But
Mhm.
then when you took that one-way ticket to Vancouver, and I took a one-way ticket to Australia very recently, 2 years ago, there's a lot of fear and
Mm.
doubt, and then there's excitement also.
Yeah.
Just take me back. What did it feel like? Was it thought through that you're going to take this one-way ticket to Vancouver and come back in 16 years? Where are we on that?
So after I'd spent a glorious 2 years in the UK traveling, having a great time, I had different friends coming and exploring, living with me. Time of my life, really was. And then I came back to Sydney, wanted to ensure that I felt that excitement, that joy of travel. So I lived in Coogee, which is a very popular transient place where overseas backpackers live. So I wanted to remain in that mindset. And then I booked that one way to Vancouver, as I said. My sister, who's a couple of years younger than me, she followed in my footsteps, or like most Australians, you can move to London. And she was in London at that time and she wanted to keep traveling. She said, I'm going to move to Vancouver. And I said, perfect, I'll meet you there. So I ended up living with my sister and her partner for a year. And that just made it a bit more of a soft landing, of course. But for me, it was about continuing that excitement and that joy of traveling and meeting new people. And I hadn't reached that phase where I'd settle down, have kids. I was just in exploring, figuring out myself as a person through this as well.
Wow, I love how a simple statement, right? I'll see you there, and you're going from London to Vancouver. I'm gonna see you there. That's it's almost like you're going from one suburb in Melbourne
Yeah,
to
yeah.
another. I'll see you there. I'll see you at that cafe.
I'll see you
Um,
soon.
I'll see you soon. I'll just take a flight that'll take about 20 hours, and
Yeah.
it'll get me to where we'll meet each other. You spoke about understanding yourself and finding yourself. How does travel in your mind, Chris? And travel is a big part of your journey. How does traveling really help us explore who we are?
I wrote a post about this maybe a couple of years ago, and I said the best thing you can do for your growth is move to the other side of the world or move completely away from your home city. It could be from Sydney to Melbourne, it could be from New York to LA, whatever the city is, but really putting yourself in situations that make you uncomfortable. And as you said, you go over to a different country, you're learning a different culture, you're learning a different way of life. It really puts you in those situations which helps you grow as a person. And that's what I think is really the beauty about travel. And I've been fortunate to do that a couple of times, move countries, move cities. And I think that's the best lesson you can ever teach yourself, is to put yourself in that situation and see what comes about.
But that almost sounds really brave, Chris. And so I'm gonna play like the devil's advocate because say some of our listeners are in the age group of say 25 to 40, right? And they are at a stage when they're either getting into that space where
Yeah.
life's gonna kind of settle down, or
hmm
is already settled down and they are in their jobs for 10 years, have a family. And I'm gonna put myself not the right kind of example to look at, right? So because I also made this shift 2 years ago, but for someone who is not brave enough or who feels like, why do I need to push myself out of my comfort zone? How do you help them?
Well, I think everyone's different. I think naturally about my brother who's never really traveled or left Australia, and for him, that's fine. He doesn't want to do that. I think each person is different, so you can't force those different type of things. But if you want to really learn a lot about yourself and pushing yourself to grow, I know it's cliche, but the only way you're going to grow is through those uncomfortable situations and doing things that you've never done before. And this is the beauty of it. And moving to another country such as the UK or Canada will certainly see what you're made of. And I think it certainly pushes you to grow so much as an individual. And as I said, I'm a person that has really been built on travel and the experience that I've been through. My journey is different. Not to say that everyone has to travel in order to get to where they need to be, but for me, it's certainly helped me so much.
You know what this is reminding me of? Many years ago, I did a course in photography, and I used to love that, and I still love that. I don't do that often. And the first thing that the instructor on day one told us was that every single day over the next 6 weeks, I think 6 weeks was the length of the program, you have to do something that's different or that's
Yes.
uncomfortable. And they asked us to do something as simple as like I would brush my teeth with my right hand, and they said, Utkarsh, start doing it with your left hand. In the first few days, it felt really uncomfortable. But what they were trying to do was to trigger a different part of our brain. And I think this is what you're also kind of nudging slash referring into. And so to our listeners who cannot shift where you live or cannot change places or cannot drastically so take that one way ticket from Delhi to Melbourne or from Vancouver back to Sydney or Sydney to London, just try and push yourself from that comfort zone a little bit, because ultimately, as you're saying, Chris, the cliches are a cliche because of a reason, because they've been done and repeated a million times and they yield a slightly better result, maybe is all we're saying. Would that be fair to say?
That would be fair, and I think hearing this, it reminds me of a quote: "Everything you want is on the other side of everything that you're avoiding."
Everything you want is on the other side of everything you're avoiding. Give me an example.
So let's say you are scared of public speaking, for example. Let's just say that, or you're afraid of bungee jumping. Let's say bungee jumping. So you go out and do that because you know that it's scary. You're going to be scared throughout the process, but it could be one of the greatest experiences that you ever have. I think naturally, as human beings, we learn fear as we get older. I'm
Yeah.
sure you probably have those same memories as a kid. I have vivid memories of riding down bikes down hills
Yeah.
that were literally like this,
Right.
with no helmets on. And I'm not telling people to wear no helmets, it's a long time ago, but wear a helmet. But driving down these hills on my bike, my hands behind my back, just no fear. No fear at that stage. And I think we learn fear as we get older, so we become more adverse to it. So think about the things that you're avoiding right now and push yourself just to do it. Could be one little thing. It doesn't have to be bungee jumping. Could be driving a certain way or doing something that you've always wanted to do. Learn a guitar or some different hobby, right?
Yeah. Changing a career, finding a new
Yeah.
job. You're in a toxic culture, but you feel like the job market's not. And when we're recording this, this is April of 2025. So yeah, people could feel that. I love what you're saying. And another thing that comes to mind as I'm thinking about that, and fear is something that's very close to my heart. I gave a TEDx, Chris, where I spoke about fear a lot. I think it's our relationship with fear that shifts,
hmm
because we do have a certain level of fear when we're born, but those are
Hmm.
basically out of the reflexes, right? And everything else to us is where we are able to be courageous. But as we
Hmm.
grow up, as society tells us that things have to be in a certain way, or you have to walk in a certain way, or you have to talk in a certain way, or you have to dress in a certain way, that's when
Hmm.
we start to fear those situations.
Yes, I would agree with that as well. And we have today where there's so much information being thrown at us, it's hard to know what's real and what's not with the advancement of AI as well. So we're really in a complex time for human nature as well as kids. Even growing up, I'm sure you experienced this overall. It's certainly complex to be a kid with the digital world that we live in now as well.
100%, 100%. And the world is evolving so quickly. I wonder, and my younger son, Chris, he's 11. And so by the
Hmm.
time he has to get into uni, and I don't know if he'll get into uni or not, but in about 6 or 8 years, the world would be a very, very different place, a very different place.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how quickly things are moving. It's incredible. I follow a couple of AI creators, and the way things are evolving, it's light speed. Things are coming out, then they're overcoming those things. It's hard to keep up.
Yeah, it is so hard to keep up. And I want to kind of have our conversation have the human thread while we speak about AI, and to me, like the core or the denominator of this conversation is going to be travel because I want to kind of keep coming back to that. It's a fascinating topic. What do you think in your experience, maybe an experience that you remember or something that you can vividly, like almost as you close your eyes, think about that travel experience that you've
Mm.
had that you feel is something that's a worth sharing, but also is very vivid for you as a human being.
Mm. There's so many. It's hard to pinpoint. I've been fortunate to travel a lot. I would have to go back to the first ever trip when I moved over to the UK. I remember it vividly because it felt like such an event. It was a sliding door moment. I had a girlfriend who I'd been with for a number of years. She was at the airport, upset. My mum was there, my dad was there, whole family was there. So I think it was just such a huge momental moment for me to be taking off where I hadn't really traveled at all. And here I was at the airport about to travel 24 hours away to the other side of the world to really catapult and change my life in so many different ways. If I never left Australia, I probably would have married that girl with multiple kids right now. But my story was going to be something completely different.
Very interesting. And imagine we're talking about, and which again feels like it makes me feel like we're so old, but we're not. But what I'm also
Not yet.
thinking, like this was a time when you did not have, like, you could get off and do a FaceTime call back home, or this is not a time when you almost like had internet in the
No,
in the airline.
no, this was 2005, 2007 when I lived in the UK. We had calling cards. Hopefully, most people know what they are, but
I don't think so.
you'd have to pay as you go credit to utilize a number to call back to Australia. So it was a third party source, and the minutes were really expensive.
Really expensive.
Really, really expensive. So
Mhm.
having a conversation with people on the other side of the world back 20 years ago now, it was a different time.
Yeah.
So, and we didn't really have much social media back then as well. It was just really you and your support network that you had on the ground.
Yeah. What a world. And I remember even like an incoming call on the phone was paid for. So I remember back home in India, we used to do like if I've reached my friend's place and I want to kind of call them downstairs, I just
Yeah.
give them a missed call and cut the phone so that they don't pick up. And when they pick up, I'm like, what the hell, man? What's wrong with you? Why did you pick up my phone?
There were simpler times, right? And
They
I
were.
always think about how did we meet up with people? We just told them you have to be there at 7 p.m. And if they didn't turn up at 7 p.m., just have a good night. We'll see you later on.
Fascinating. How did we decide what place to eat? Because there was no rating to go to, there was no Google to search the reviews for. And but absolutely simpler times, right? Simpler times.
Yeah, they were great times, but
Yeah.
we're sounding antique in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah. Part of me also feels like does the generation today really get to enjoy that serendipity, Chris? Because now
Mm.
we almost like over plan, and I'm also making that error every time, right? We overplan our meetings, we overplan our
Yes.
conversations, we overplan when to meet, where to meet, what to eat. We send menus up front that please select what you want to eat because you don't want to kind of waste your time. So how you seen that evolve in your journey as well?
I think it's interesting. You mentioned that, you mentioned AI, and I think we're seeing a world dominated with AI. However, the superpower is going to be the human centered approach of leadership.
Beautiful.
AI is a tool in service of you, in the service of humanity at the end of the day. And I think it's really, really great to see that humanity is coming back to the center of everything, because at the end of the day, when we think about leadership coming from the leadership lens, is that we're people leading people. That's what it comes down to. That's being human at the end of the day. And to your first point, I'm trying to do things that are more human, not being addicted to my phone, just going with the flow of things, not having a plan, just enjoying life and going with the unexpected versus living through a calendar.
Yeah, powerful, powerful. Since you spoke about, I think this idea of human-centered leadership, I think that's very close to my heart as well. And as we segue into this conversation around leadership, one question that's poking in my head is like, what is Chris's definition of leadership? So, would appreciate you to kind of shed light on that. But then also, again, taking us back to travel, like how has traveling through these diverse cultures, meeting new people, how has that influenced your leadership muscle, Chris?
So I'll answer, great question, and I'll answer it in two parts. I think I've been fortunate to live and work Australia, the UK, Canada, North America. And the one thing that I see throughout it is that the people need to be seen, heard, and valued. That's what it comes down to. That's what leadership is about, is making sure that you understand people, you meet them where they're at, making sure that they feel value, understanding the person in front of you as well. One of the key things that I like to do anytime I step into a new role as a leader is just get to know every single person, get to know the person, listen, what's working, what's not, what motivates you before I start rolling out any strategic changes or my vision or my goals. I really want to understand what motivates every single person. What are they seeing on the front lines that I may not be able to see, or what feedback they haven't heard? And for me, that's important when it comes to leadership. I've always come from the lens of I want to be the leader that I wish I really had. I know it's cliche, but it's so important. You're a leader who is there to help people get better. It is your responsibility. It's a privilege to be a leader. And I think a lot of people lose sight about that little piece, is that you're not just given a role as a leader because you're a high performing individual contributor. You see it, I'm sure you've seen it in different workplaces as well, where people are put into leadership roles where they're great individuals, but they're not great leaders, or they're not great at human connection and helping people move forward. And I think that's the piece when it comes to leadership that is missed in a lot of ways.
But it's so simple, right? Because what you said, and I totally 100% resonate and deeply believe in what you're saying. It's just three things, right? Seen, heard, and valued. And that's what people need. But you don't see that, Chris. And let me be honest. So I've recorded about 20 plus episodes of the podcast till now. And when I just asked the guest like feedback later, one thing that says that Utkarsh, you were listening to me and I was listening to me, and this felt like a conversation.
Yes.
And then I feel like, and should not all podcasts do that? And I'm not saying podcasts don't do that, but last year I ended up getting interviewed about 40 podcasts, and I saw that there were some who were just wanting to go through like a list of questions and get this shit done with. And I feel, again, coming back to leadership, it is such a simple thing: seen, heard, and valued. There's infinite gigabytes of content that's out there in the world that's being published every single day, and you and I are not different. So we are also part of that content piece, and we're doing it because we see that leadership is still not where it should be.
Agreed.
Where's that pitfall? Where is that gap that we are unable to identify?
Poor leadership, it has to come down to, and I think that's a big part of it. And to your content piece, I shared a piece of content last week, which is incredibly surprising to me. I'll say that again: 85% of new managers or leaders do not receive formal training. How are you setting people up for success? I just couldn't believe that when I read that a couple of weeks ago. I was doing some research for content and that came up. So I think there's just such a huge leadership gap right now with all the complex things that we're dealing with, the shift of the elderly workforce coming in, then we have the Gen X people that are coming in. They have different priorities, and you have such a different variety of people having different needs, and you as a leader are being asked to do so many different things. And then you have AI, diversity. It's never been more challenging to be a leader. But to your point, I think we overcomplicate something which is so simple.
Yeah.
Simplicity at its finest. Take care of people.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's where the challenge is, right? Because we're playing this again and again in our head and trying to make it really complex, trying to
Yes.
take people through these hours and hours of content, or take them through these leadership workshops and conferences and what. And I'm not saying that they're not valuable. I mean, that to me is like my bread and butter. That's what I really work for. So I'm not saying that that's not important, but I'm saying is that how do you really simplify the model? And so what you and I are saying, Chris, is that it's as simple as just these three elements of being seen, heard, and valued. And if that can be figured out, then we can help people become better leaders for, and then who can help develop new leaders for the world.
Yeah. Help people become better at work and outside of work. Understand what motivates them. Where do they want to be in 4 or 5 years? You've heard the standard question. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? But ask that question, where do you see yourself outside of work, here? Help people get there is such a huge thing. And I think sometimes we just don't sit down and have those conversations. And I think the biggest word that keeps coming up here is, are leaders caring enough? Or are they just ticking boxes? And I think a lot of times people are just ticking boxes or not even taking the time to sit down and listen to people and understand what their needs are.
Yeah. So let's challenge ourselves, Chris. And I'm starting to throw these challenges to us because, if a young leader is watching this right now,
Yes.
or if someone who has been in leadership for 5 years, what they've done is they've seen maybe some form of leadership that's been kind of passed on to them as generational trauma, or as whatever we might want to call it, and they feel like, Utkarsh, Chris, you're talking about all of this, but this kind of leadership does not work in the real workplace. In the real workplace, you have to be authoritarian sometimes. You have to get things done. There are deadlines to match. So this warm and fuzzy, seen, valued, heard, this kind of leadership does not work. If there's someone who's listening to this, but is also on the edge where they feel like, okay, I'm going to give it a shot, what these guys are saying. How do we build a model for them? If you were to try and give them like really practical tips on how to shift themselves from being the leaders who they are to becoming a better version of the leaders that they can be, what's your guidance?
Great question. And I think it comes down to, again, really asking the questions of your people. The best feedback that you can get is the people that you work with, the people, your direct reports. And I think a lot of times as a young leader, I know this was a challenge for me, was asking for feedback, soliciting feedback for myself, but having those conversations. And if you're listening to this, are you asking for feedback? Are you having regular one-on-ones or cadence with one-on-ones and framing them around a supportive, open conversation? And ask those things. How do you think I'm doing as your leader? If you were in my shoes, where do you think I should be focusing more of my time? Where do you think I can improve as a leader? Is there certain things that you feel that I can continually work on? I think those conversations and those feedback that you get from the people that you work with will be helpful to you. It will also require you to detach yourself from the feedback in a lot of ways, and don't personalize and hold on to it. It is constructive. It is a roadmap to help you to move from point A to point B. So firstly, ask the people that you have reporting to you. And then in most cases, you always have someone reporting to you as well. Are you getting what you need in terms of the development from them? Ask very similar questions. What do you see I'm doing well? What am I not doing right?
Yeah.
And then from there, really, you should have a good understanding of where your opportunities lie.
Yeah. That's these are some pearls of wisdom that if you're listening, note down to these questions, because I think I absolutely agree with you, Chris, that asking these questions, and we don't create enough space for such questions, but asking these questions is going to give you insight into what you can do, into how you can improve yourself, and it's a valuable piece. But I think I'm going to speak of a challenge that I've seen as a prereq to this, Chris, because what happens is that, and I am trying to play like the devil's advocate for our listeners, and they'll be like, Chris, I love the questions, and yes, the questions make sense. But when you go and ask these questions to your people, sometimes all you get is crickets.
Yes.
And I have my hypothesis, but where is
Yeah.
that coming from?
Well, it comes from your equity that you've built up to that point.
Love that.
So if this is your first one-on-one, you've been in that role for a year, and all of a sudden you're like, Peter, it's time for us to meet. And then you pull out 5 different questions that they never heard before. Naturally, you're going to get some level of hesitation, right? I think it's a cadence that you need to set up, and you need to start chipping away slowly. Just have some very open-ended questions the first couple of times. And once that the other person on the end of the conversation sees that you're creating a cadence, he's met me one time this month, and then the next month, and the third month, I guarantee you, as you continually sit down in that chair and give people the space and you ask better questions, then you'll get better responses.
Love that. So build that trust, build that equity, because unless you have that, no one's going to respond to these questions. And these questions can sometimes also ask people to really deeply reflect on the relationship that you and them have. And so I think another piece that I'd recommend to our listeners, Chris, is that they could probably just send these questions upfront in an email or on the calendar invite before they kind of are sitting one, and because then Peter's gonna be thinking like, what the hell, man, am I going to get fired today because my boss never asked me like, Peter, can we meet and I have a few questions to ask you. So love that. So build that equity, do that through these consistent practices, touch points where you can have people feel seen, valued, and heard. Once you build that equity, what you're saying, Chris, is and some open-ended questions, some questions that will help you get some great feedback as to what you're doing right versus what you're not, so that you can start to build upon that. And then next, I think, Chris, that what comes is that based on what you've received, you start to really put in the action, because if you don't, then why the hell did that meeting happen?
Exactly. And I was going to mention the point around giving people the time to validate, go through those questions in advance through a calendar or an email invite, whatever works. You know your people, and I think you'll get to understand everyone as you go through that process. And you mentioned a really good point. I think where the opportunity lies and where you'll get even more credibility, equity, is in the action that you do afterwards. If they're giving you actionable feedback around certain tasks, you then take that away. And then when you have the next conversation, you either update them at the time of the meeting or in between to let them know. Then that shows you can follow through with what you're being asked as a leader, which is huge.
Yeah, super powerful, and it also helps you build trust, right? Because and I have these conversations in the workshops that people would say that they'll get something done, but
Yes.
then they don't, and they say that they'll get this done only for the sake of the conversation that they're having with the other person. And I think that's the biggest way you can erode trust with your people. So that's something you should never be doing as a leader.
100%. It takes weeks, months, years to build trust, and you can lose trust just like that. So always be careful of the words that you're using and the actions that follow through with it as well.
Yeah. What are some do not do kind of behaviors, Chris? And I don't know, this question came from just this conversation you and I are having. What are some behaviors that you would say, if they're like top 3 behaviors a leader should never be doing, what would those 3 be according to you?
Do as I say, not as I do is a huge one. You as a leader have the ability to model the behavior of your team. So making sure that you're very similar to what we're just talking about, making sure that your actions align with your words. Don't go against your words. If you say, I'm going to do X, or this is the expectations of us as a team, let's say coming into the office 3 days a week. It's a hybrid situation. And then you don't come in, you come in 1 day a week.
Yeah.
That's going to erode trust pretty quickly there. Other things that I would say is making sure that you are consistent with your words as well. Nothing worse than not being consistent in your words and people not being able to understand exactly what you're telling them. Communication is one skill that is the most critical. I would put it in the top 3. I'm sure you would agree as well, is making sure your communication skills are aligned with the message you're trying to convey as a leader.
Yeah, love that. I think we are very aligned with what you and I are speaking. If you were to now look at just this, the impact that AI is having on leadership, Chris, and
Hmm.
and both of us have our views, and I know it's a very fascinating time because all of us have AI to our disposal, and it's become a mass product so quickly. And I mean, 2 years ago, if you were to ask someone that is there something called Chat GPT, I mean, at least as a mass product, no one would have known. But now it seems like from my 10-year-old to an 8-year-old is trying to see, like, can I talk to Chat GPT and figure a recipe out, figure
Yeah.
something out, or figure life out in some cases. How
Yeah.
are you seeing AI influence the path that leadership is starting for itself?
It's a tool. It's a collaboration tool, and I think it helps leaders become even more excellent than they already are. It's a thinking partner in a lot of different ways. I use it sometimes when I'm thinking of a certain situation. I do not use that as a clarification tool, but I certainly, if I want to bounce around ideas and someone is not available, it's certainly there to help you as a partner. It can also coach you in a lot of different ways. If you're thinking about certain things, or if you're working on a project, it can certainly help you with that as well. I think it's a tool to help extend your excellence. And I think the education and awareness is the most important part for you as a leader or someone who's just really starting to understand the basics, making sure that you understand what are the principles of what AI can and can't do to help amplify your leadership effectiveness.
Absolutely, and so well said, Chris. I think it's a train that everyone should experience, and there
Yes.
should be no one who does not get on this train just because they feel a sense of fear against this technology, because it's not gonna take over the world, but it's gonna make our lives better. I love this idea, and I love these brainstorming conversations that I have with ChatGPT because
Yeah.
that's my go-to tool. I just love it because it asks me questions that I would not have thought about for myself, even while thinking for the business. So I absolutely agree with that. And I think then the whole kind of the meat lies in putting things into practice, because ChatGPT can give you 100,000 ideas to execute, but it's the human who's going to kind of make shit happen, make things happen.
Exactly. You're still the driver when it comes to the conversation. So you need to ensure you're clarifying the output, and also you're being crystal clear in terms of the prompting that you're doing as well. You just can't put in a simple prompt saying, give me a presentation for tomorrow's meeting. You have to be crystal clear around what you do. It's education around making sure you're making use of the tool is really, really in your advantage as a leader.
Yeah, 100%. As I'm having this conversation with you, Chris, and I'm thinking, and I know how much you've traveled over the last few weeks. I'm thinking, like, we are having this conversation. Has Chris's jet lag over, or is it not? But I'd love to know, like, what's in store, because it's a big shift to travel back to almost your home country from a country that's been home for 20 years. So what's been emerging for you as an individual?
It's been it's been great for me. I finished up my COO role at the end of January, and then had to pack up life. We left at the end of February, spent some time in Vancouver. I was living in Toronto previous to that. I lived in Vancouver for 8 years and then Toronto for 8 years. I was repositioned out there with work. So I've lived on both sides of the country as well, which was fantastic. And then I was fortunate, as you and I were communicating before we recorded this, I was traveling through Southeast Asia for 5 weeks, which was incredible. I hit 80 countries now that I've been fortunate enough to visit. And for me, I'm just enjoying the time off, figuring things out as I enter this new phase in Australia, coming back and re-educating myself on a completely different market. I'm still coaching people, I'm still creating content. I've been reading a lot. I've just been really slowing down and appreciating things really more. And as I come back to Australia, I just wanted to really feel gratitude and spend as much time with family and really embrace being on this side of the world as we reset and start again when it comes to living in Australia. It's exciting.
Beautiful. 80, you said 80?
Yes, 8080.
Wow. Which is the continent that is still left untouched, except I'm assuming Antarctica.
Antarctica is the one continent I haven't been to yet. South America is high on my list. I've done Colombia, I've done Peru, I haven't done Argentina, Brazil, Bolivia. So I would say South America's high on my list for sure. I've been fortunate to do a lot of travel through Europe when I lived there. Also, the Middle East is certainly high there as well. India is certainly high there as well. I just love traveling. There's still a lot more for me to see. Being in this part of the world, I'm definitely going to see closer destinations, which is cool. And also, Australia is a pretty beautiful country. I've seen more of Canada and Europe than I have Australia. I haven't been to Cairns, I haven't been to Perth, I haven't been to Hobart. There's a lot to see.
Absolutely, 100%. And when I asked you about your travel memory, I think what emerged for me was when we came to Australia, we within a few months, I think, planned a trip to Grampians. Have you been to the Grampians?
Poor Australian, as
So you should plan that trip, and it's like a 2 hour drive here from Melbourne, right? So we went to this place where it's kind of the highest point of the whole national park, and you see, and it's the winters, right? July. So I planned this. My wife planned this for my birthday, and I was standing there at the top point, and there was just clouds underneath. It seemed like I've reached this place called heaven, where there's nothing else beyond this. And to me, like, I still refer, like, we were in India for a couple of weeks just a few weeks back. I keep telling my wife, we have to go back to heaven. We have to go back to heaven because Melbourne is actually heaven. 80 countries, beautiful. Let's have more conversations on that. I'd love to know more stories. But as we get into this, this number prompts me to this final question that I have for you, Chris. Is in a few decades from now, with all the adventures that are left to be taken, there'll be a point when you'll be 80-year-old, 80. If that 80-year-old Chris were to come to you right now and have a conversation or give you one piece of advice, what do you think that 80-year-old will have for you?
such a good question. It would be around life. I think life just goes by so quickly, and I'm sure you appreciate that as you have kids. Appreciate the time that you have here. Don't hold anything back. Don't second guess yourself. Just do it. Just do it. I know that seems overemphasized with Nike, but I think it's just such a simple mindset. And one of my goals for this year was just to really be all in everything that I do. And I think my 80-year-old self would say, go all in, have no regrets. Life is short. Be proud.
So powerful, so powerful. I love that that advice. So for anyone who's listening, we've spoken about a few fears. We've spoken about things that hold you back. We've spoken about leadership. We've spoken about it in terms of people, but you're at the end of the day also leading your life. So let's
Yes.
take the 80-year-old Chris's advice to heart. And if there is something that you wanted to do, just go ahead and do it, because what the hell? Who's gonna worry about the consequences, right? Because it's only you that is responsible for you and your loved ones. So don't do things that might don't drive down a steep hill without a helmet, because that might put
Wear a
you
helmet.
at risk. So don't do that. But whatever is a dream that you're chasing, just go do it, because at the end of the day, it's going to be worth it.
100%.
Amazing.
Life is so short, and I think we spend so much time worrying about what other people think when they're only concerned about themselves. It's just you against yourself. So only worry about the person you were yesterday and a year ago.
Yeah, love that. Thank you for this time, Chris. Thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and yeah, wishing the best in all the adventures, and hopefully you get to hit another 80 countries before you get to 80.
That would be amazing. I'm hoping to get there one day, but thank you for having me as well.
Absolutely. Take care.
Bye-bye.
That's a wrap for today's episode of the Ignite Neurons podcast. If you found value in this, here's what I recommend. Take out a paper or a diary and just put down one thing that you can change about your life because you listen to this podcast. I'd really appreciate if you could share that in the comments below, because I'd love to see how it's impacting you or not. If you're on YouTube and watching this, then like, share, and subscribe, and please make this wisdom go viral. And if you're someone who loves your podcast on the go, then Spotify and Apple Podcasts are your go-to places, or wherever you're listening to this, just like, share it with a friend, and leave a comment, because I'd love to engage, love to have a conversation with you. Until next time, till we meet again, keep those neurons ignited, stay curious, keep learning, be someone who embraces a growth mindset, and I look forward to seeing you very soon.